It's finally happened. I can play Mountain Blade in borderless windowed mode. Game of the frickin' year. Bannerlord has been a long time coming. After all those teasers we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, we've finally been able to get our grubby little hands on the sequel to our beloved butter hoarding simulator. And it's actually pretty damn fun. At its core, Bannerlord is a good sequel. It expands upon and introduces new mechanics from its predecessor, adds a swath of quality of life improvements, and has drastically overhauled the game in a visual sense. Not that that's much to brag about, but that's not to say that it has done everything right. Some of the game's mechanics could do with some tweaking. The game currently locks features behind a set quest line that takes away from the sandbox gameplay we've come to know from the series, and the game has some pretty severe performance issues that hinder larger battles and sieges in particular. It's far from a perfect game, but it's also a game that's quite far from being finished, having only just released in early access about 2.5 weeks ago. Despite this, the developers have been very active in their updates and patches so far, which is an encouraging sign. Because of how often the game is being updated, I am aware of how quickly this review could become obsolete. I'll do my best to talk more about core game mechanics and not focus too heavily on small details in order to keep this review relevant for as long as possible, but I will almost certainly be revisiting the game for another review in the future. Despite all of this, I've sunk around 70 hours into the game in around 2.5 weeks and have been eagerly awaiting sinking my teeth into both the game and this review. So, without further ado, is Mountain Blade Bannerlord worth buying yet? As previously mentioned, Bannerlord does what a good sequel should do. Many of the mechanics of its predecessor have been expanded upon, and there are plenty more that have been added without trampling over the crux of what made Warband fun. The best thing about this game is setting out into the world of Calradia and getting shit done. It doesn't fence you in and tell you what to do, and has this incredible sense of progression as you rise from a wanderer with an army of peasant rabble to a veteran with highly trained soldiers and holdings of your own. That's not to say that you need to be a feudal lord either. You can play a campaign as a mercenary chasing coin from factions struggling in conflicts, or a merchant peddling goods from town to town. Like a true sandbox, there's no set goal for you to complete. Most importantly, it's not just you playing this game. The map is filled with lords all pursuing their own goals, as well as kings that wish to expand their holdings. Through wars and politics, towns and castles will change hands, and the political landscape will shift along with it. Troop recruitment has been completely overhauled, definitely for the better. Each village and town will have notable characters from whom you can recruit troops, and with whom you can improve relations by completing tasks for them or taking down bandits that harass their villages. As your relations with notables improve, so do the number and quality of troops that you can recruit from them. This is especially useful after losing troops in battle, and means that you can enlist a specific number of desired troops, rather than just taking a set number of new recruits. I will say that doing quests for villages can get a little tedious, especially considering the rather small pool of quests that they have to offer. Some of the quests were also near impossible to complete, while some were way too easy. In general, I found the game to be a fair bit harder than Warband. Bandits in particular posed much more of a threat now, other than looters who were still just fodder for training recruits. Map movement and party speed have also been reworked, now not simply relying on how big the party is or how much cavalry is in it, but also on how much cargo you're carrying and how many extra horses you have for non-mounted troops. Morale also plays more of a role than in Warband, with low morale leaving your troops likely to break rank and flee in battle. It was both dictated by recent events as well as having multiple types of food available for your troops, with higher morale also increasing party speed. Just like in Warband, you have the option to align yourself with one of the warring factions that just wants to rule this goddamn mess in the hope that the leader doesn't hate you enough to not give you any fiefs, or you can even carve a kingdom out for yourself if you've got the guts, and are willing to do a tedious questline first. At the moment, the only game mode available is the campaign mode, which starts you in the same part of the map every time and entails following set objectives over the top of the sandbox gameplay we've come to know from the franchise. And the questline is boring as fuck. It has you run around for ages trying to find suitable lords to talk to, and grows tedious very quickly. While I was doing this stupid ass wild goose chase, I was just wanting to go back and actually have fun with the game. And while I don't like the use of, "oh, you can just ignore it, bro," as an excuse for this sort of thing, you really can't ignore it in order to get the full experience. Being able to form your own kingdom is locked behind completing it. Not to mention the fact that once you start the kingdom creation quest, you have 10 years to finish it, and if you don't, you'll lose the ability to create a new kingdom permanently. It would have been nice if the game told me that there'd be a time limit. There needs to be more than one way to start a kingdom, and not through some dumbass quest line. There needs to be a clear split between sandbox and campaign, and not this weird hybrid of both. Supposedly there'll be a proper sandbox mode when the game fully comes out, and I hope Tale Worlds do away with any unnecessary narratives, because I think that's the best way to experience a game like this. Most of the gameplay revolves around you traveling the map, visiting settlements, and having encounters with enemies that will initiate combat, which at a first glance might appear a little shallow and repetitive, but part of what makes the combat fun is the context for it. I'll admit, killing looter stacks over and over isn't exactly the most enthralling gameplay action out there, and it is often what you'll be doing in the early stages of your campaign, but one of the most satisfying parts of this game is building yourself up from nothing. Mount and Blade is not the sort of game that you will throw a few hours into and suddenly you're the best guy out there. While the combat is simple, you don't just become unstoppable because you swing a sword good. Building up an army will take time and strategy, and acquiring holdings for yourself will take even longer. But what keeps it interesting and not just a grind fest is how quickly it can all be taken away from you. That elite train squad you spent the last 10 hours building up can be crushed and disbanded in the blink of an eye because you got too cocky following that big army, or you spent a little too long waiting in town as the enemy came to siege it. The game is brutal in how it can kick you back to what feels like square one in a mere instant. Obviously, you're not totally back to where you started, unless you die, which is possible in Bannerlord now, but the game does have a habit of kicking you in the balls and calling you a little bitch. And really, that's not a bad impression of life in the Middle Ages. It's easier to bounce back with stronger recruits from notables that like you or from your own holdings, though those holdings can also be taken away from you just as easily as your army can. But while the combat itself might appear basic, and in many ways it is, that doesn't make it bad. Melee combat follows the same directional pattern as Warband, as well as adding directional blocking for shields, and archery and thrown weapons also work much the same. It's still as slashy and satisfying as ever, and has only been made even more satisfying thanks to improved ragdolling and physics and much more fluid animations for when you do cut or shoot down an enemy out on the battlefield, only appealing even more to that psychopath that lives inside of me. What makes the combat in Mount and Blade clever is how it works for the more chaotic battlefield fights as well as in a duel setting. Out on the battlefield, you'll often be swinging and hoping you connect with something, and in a 1v1 it takes a little more thought and patience, unless you're a little bitch that plays with auto-directional blocking. Or even worse, a shield. But it doesn't rely on some bullshit overtly complex melee system. It's simple enough that you can jump right in and have fun with it, but there's enough to prevent it from being Skyrim and having you say, fuck it, I'll just use a bow and arrow instead. Although I will say that archery seems to be a lot more powerful than it was in Warband, partially because your infantry seem to forget that they have shields unless you specifically tell them to use them. I often found myself avoiding enemy armies with a lot of archers or horse archers in them because I knew I'd suffer a lot more casualties. Horse archers in particular I found to be very effective, which was good for me as the majority of my playtime was spent as a Crusade vassal. Running rings around enemy infantry as we pelted them with arrows was incredibly fun. Enemy AI in general I would say has improved, and in larger battles with nobles they'll often take up more strategic positions on the landscape, though they did sometimes have their moments.
This battle's been going on for like 10 minutes. They're just looking at each other.
Oh, they're moving up. No, they just fucking turned around again. Melee combat on horseback was still a mainstay, though I felt like your weapon reach was a fair bit shorter than in Warband, and sort of forced you away from using one-handed weapons as they'd put you in a dangerous spot. Polearms and two-handed weapons were definitely the melee weapons of choice. The combat isn't all just about the slicing and dicing, however. A big part of it is commanding your troops into formation and ordering your men around the battlefield. It's great that the game gives you the option of being more hands-on with your troops, and you can realistically play it almost like an RTS, standing behind your troops while they do the fighting for you, or obviously you can get in there and do some work yourself. One feature I was very much looking forward to was sieges, which I'll have to admit I was a little underwhelmed by. They're certainly better than in Warband, particularly due to their much larger scale, but I found I didn't get much of an opportunity to see many of the siege engines in action. The new setup mechanics were neat, but the AI didn't really seem to like to build much more than just a battering ram and maybe a siege tower to go with it. Sieges were also marred with performance issues and were the part of the game most affected by them. Frame rate drops were very common, even when compared to field battles with the same number of troops deployed. Despite much of the siege gameplay still just being running up slightly less janky ladders, they were still enjoyable in both attack and defense, and a nice alternative from field battles, and I still think that the context for them is what really makes them fun. Character creation and development has also been expanded upon in Bannerlord, and the way that you level up and improve your skills has been totally overhauled, I believe for the better. Unlike Warband, where you will gain XP to level up and then simply spend points to increase skills arbitrarily, you will gain levels by improving your skills, and rather than just weapon proficiency increasing with use, all skills from weapon proficiency to tactics and leadership are improved by actually using them. It makes for a much more dynamic character progression, and you'll gain skills dependent on your playstyle. It is still influenced by spending focus points and attribute points that you gain as you level up as well, so you can still spec yourself out for a certain build. It carries over a similar backstory creation to Warband that will affect your starting stats as well, though this time you can actually see the bonuses you're getting as you go, which just makes the process much more transparent. I like the fact that you could also pick a culture at the start, and that each culture had their own unique bonus to suit whatever playstyle you're going for, but I feel like a bit of balancing is needed. The Battanian Forest Speed bonus is a little situational, and the Sturgian Snow bonus was even more so, considering that even in winter only half of the map was snowy, and other bonuses like the Vlandian XP bonus and the Crusader Horse Speed bonus dwarfed them completely. Perhaps each culture should provide more than one bonus, and I hope that in the sandbox release we might have the option to play as an outsider culture and personalize our bonuses as well. Another fantastic addition to Bannerlord is its new dynamic political landscape. Nobles will now age, have children, and eventually die, either of old age, falling in battle, or from being executed. Death in battle is uncommon and not usually a threat unless you're quite old. Should the noble at the head of a clan die, they'll pass on their title and holdings to their heir, meaning that even kings will eventually pass on and new lords will take over factions. Most importantly, the same thing will happen to you. It is worth noting that character death is an option that can be turned on or off, but I would wholeheartedly recommend having it on as it makes the game's politics much more interesting and gives a lot of incentive to sticking with campaigns for the long haul. One thing that always pissed me off in Warband was that I couldn't kill enemies that I really hated. In Bannerlord, you can. You can now execute captured lords, but execution is not the sort of thing to be done lightly, as it will have severe relations penalties and might lead an enemy to return the favor should they ever get a hold of you. There's a lot more depth to realm politics in Bannerlord as well, and a lot of it revolves around spending influence. Each realm will pass different laws and edicts, all voted on by its lords, and there are also votes for who newly obtained fiefs should be awarded to, all of which the ruler can overrule if they're a total dickhead. Spending your influence in a certain way will increase your relations with one clan and decrease with the other, or if voting in your own interest, both will be displeased. There's a real sense of give and take in managing your relations, as improving with one lord will usually decrease it with another, the same going for relations with notables in villages. This meant that you can improve relations with other lords fairly easily, but unlike Warband, it didn't have you running around trying to find them and hoping that they had a quest for you. You can even spend your influence to convince your faction's leader to take a fief from another lord and put it up for vote to take it yourself, which was a total scumbag move, but a nice way to snag another castle for yourself. However, it was also very easy to lose relations with the head of your faction. Halfway through one of my campaigns, I found out that my liege hated me for some reason. I had no idea why. Turns out he gave me a castle right on our border that got instantly taken back by the time I'd realized he'd even given it to me. Relations are set with entire clans as well, and all members of each clan will have the same relation value with you. I think it would have been better if, while certain actions would change relations with the whole clan, you could gain or lose relations with each individual member as well. However, you already know my grievances with how creating a new kingdom is done in Bannerlord, but there's no way to incite a revolution politically, which is a shame considering how much more in-depth the politics are in this game. It'd be great if there was a way to start civil wars within factions, or to even try and claim the throne yourself, and it would be fantastic if AI lords could do the same, or even start new kingdoms of their own, considering they're mostly held to the same rules that you are. While I really enjoyed the almost CK2-esque character and political setup that Bannerlord has, and I think that it has great potential to make this sandbox all the more interesting and replayable, there are still some features missing to really bring it home. Now, I am not one to condone save scumming in video games, but I would personally give everyone a pass for save scumming to get married in Bannerlord. The way marriage works is pretty broken. Basically, you'll have to tell someone you fancy them and want to get married, after which you'll have to clear 2 speech checks and then pay the head of their clan a dowry, and then congratulations, you've officially accomplished something that you'll never do in real life. But the most scuffed thing about trying to get married is that if you fail one of the speech checks, that's it. No second chances, no getting to try again in a few years. The marriage is off. Locking off candidates permanently on the basis of passing a mechanic that relies heavily on RNG is ridiculous. If it's going to rely on this roll of a dice mechanic, then it should not cause you to forever lose your chances with a potential spouse. I was originally going to go on a long rant about how shit being a mercenary was, but my biggest grievance with it, being that when you left the service of a kingdom it gave you relationship penalties equal to revoking your vassalage, was removed in one of the daily patches. I will say that the payment for being a mercenary is usually pretty pitiful, though I did like that you were only paid if you actually defeated enemy parties, preventing you from taking a mercenary contract and then just sitting around collecting payment. Like Warband, the game does have a bit of a habit of getting quite grindy further into the campaign, especially when it comes to trying to retain your holdings. The AI could certainly be a little better at coordinating their armies and has a bad habit of taking settlements and leaving them largely undefended, only for the enemy to come back and take it, leaving it largely undefended, and then the cycle will repeat. And then if you do take your holdings back, you're resting on the fact that your leader is actually going to give it to you, even if you win the vote. And on the contrary, settlements you have no interest in, located far away from the core of your faction, can be handed over to you even if you don't want them, or literally vote against yourself for who it should be awarded to. Bugs and placeholders are also a general annoyance at the moment, as well as game performance and crashing. Personally, I only had the game crash on me once in my 70 odd hours of gameplay, but I won't pretend that others have not been having problems with it, and the devs have been proactive in resolving these issues. As previously mentioned, the frame rate will tank during sieges and larger battles, and in general optimization seems to be an issue. Loading screens are frequent and long, especially when entering scenes inside the major towns, and not everything is fully loaded in by the time they're finished, including your own troops. As for the bugs and placeholders, they're annoying but not deal breaking. A lot of this stuff I would imagine will be ironed out throughout the course of the early access period, and buying into the game this early, you ought to expect a bit of this stuff. Visually, this game is a major improvement on Warband. Again, not that improving on Warband's visuals is much to ask, but everything from character models, animations, and the UI has been vastly enhanced. While I wouldn't exactly call the visuals nor the sound design cutting edge, and some of the faces do still look a little goofy at times, it's certainly passable for a modern game, and town environments are certainly a lot livelier. The map itself has received a pretty massive facelift, which not only looks good but adds more functionality to it. There are more rivers and choke points on the map which create a bit more strategy, and the environment design is much more varied and interesting, not only on the overworld map but in battle scenes as well. One little thing that I really liked as well was how your map model changed depending on what you looked like and what gear you had equipped. Not a big deal, but an appreciated addition nonetheless. One thing I was dreading was the UI, which has actually turned out pretty damn good. It doesn't really hurt to look at and has plenty of quality of life improvements, particularly in towns and settlements. All trading is done in one window rather than having to cycle through the weapons, armor and horse merchants and such, and you can ransom prisoners in the menu rather than having to go into the tavern and just hoping that there's a ransom broker there. Settlement management for holdings you own is also far better. Again, it's all in one window and you can queue constructions as well. It's currently a little basic and governors have a bad habit of teleporting around to locations you specifically didn't assign them to, but all in all it's pretty good. But it's not just in towns either. There's an option to take all items after battles, you can see your movement marker on the map, you can see where you are on the map when zoomed out, and you have information on your current health, party speed and such all in the bottom corner visible on the overworld map rather than hidden behind menu screens. Control schemes are much more intuitive too. Game speed is now controlled with 1, 2 and 3, and the spectator camera is no longer controlled with the numpad, and you can control it with WAS and D and your mouse like an actual human being. All in all, the UI is far more visually appealing and intuitive as well. They've made plenty of additions that make the game more transparent, such as the Encyclopedia and the Kingdom tab, and it's probably one of the biggest and most welcome upgrades from Warband. Despite all of the hype surrounding this game and all of the expectations that we've put on it, Bannerlord has actually left me rather impressed. I think many people, myself included, were worried that the game wouldn't offer much more than a facelift and that Bannerlord would hardly justify being a sequel, but I can now play Mount and Blade in borderless windowed mode and not have to worry about it crashing every time I tab out. That in itself justifies a sequel. But there have been many welcome additions to the game. Many mechanics have been overhauled, most of them for the better. The UI has been drastically improved and sports many quality of life improvements, and Bannerlord provides a familiar experience to Warband that still feels like a totally new way to play. While I have had a lot of fun with the game so far, there have been a few things that have frustrated me too, in particular the current campaign mode tying important features like creating your own kingdom behind its quest system, and the worrying optimization and performance issues the game has. So here's hoping that stuff gets fixed down the track. The devs have been very active, basically releasing a patch almost every day so far. Most of it is bug fixes, but it's good to see that they're being proactive about it and actively involving the community. Hopefully it'll continue. If you're a fan of Warband or just like a bit of strategy and slashy medieval action, I would recommend this game even in its current state. There is still a swath of content to go through, and while not perfect, what truly is on this bitch of an earth? I won't deny that I'm a little biased, but I do genuinely think that this is a fun game, though I hope I haven't killed my vibe for when the game is fully released, and I think that's one of the most dangerous things about an early access launch like this. With the world falling apart around us at the moment, it will be interesting to see how the development of Bannerlord continues. I certainly hope they don't try to rush things as much as I want to play a finished version. We've waited long enough, and I'm sure we can wait some more.